Buckle up for AEC Trailblazers, the Founders Files, where we crack open the stories of the brightest minds in the AEC startup scene. Forget institutional pitches. We're diving deep into the real personal journeys of these industry disruptors. Get ready for some casual chats firsthand.
Hello, and welcome everybody to another episode of the AC Trailblazers podcast, where we interview the most amazing founders of the tech scene of the AC. Today with us, we have Andrew Xu, is the CEO and co-founder of Offsite, a cutting-edge project management software that revolutionizes the construction industry with modular and prefabricated building components. With over a decade of experience in consulting, software implementation, and product development, Andrew is at the forefront of transforming offsite construction into a more efficient, sustainable, and affordable industry. His leadership in operations, product development, and client implementation has helped Offsite streamline project delivery, quality, and collaboration for construction teams globally. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks to you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is a topic that I love, so I feel it's going to be a really fun conversation. But before we get into the weeds, where are you based, Andrew?
I'm currently based in Las Vegas.
Really? I lived there for many years.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Love entertainment. There's no state tax. It just gets very hot during the summertime. That's the negative. But I was in San Francisco before that for like 6 years, and I was looking to after the pandemic where I should be based and stuff like that. And Vegas is kind of a good choice based on like where it's located. Very good airport. You can go to any of the major cities. I can visit clients really easily, so I just worked out.
Yeah, traffic. Like that's what I say. When you say you live in Vegas, people are like, "What?" It's like it's a quiet town, a lot of nature, cheap, no traffic, good airport. Like what else can you ask for, right?
Yeah. I would say it has surprisingly good Asian food compared to what people think. Yeah.
True. Like, well, did you have from the best to the worst, right? But there's so many good quality like restaurants. Like, we can speak about that after the show. I have so many good ones to recommend, by the way. But
Yeah. Absolutely.
but yeah. Good old times. And there is also a lot of construction in Vegas, so it's also a good place to be in this industry. But tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, were you born and raised in San Francisco? How you ended up working
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
AC?
So I was born and raised in New York City, Staten Island. And then I went to college in Philly at Penn, did engineering there. And then I graduated around 2010. So this is kind of like right after the financial crisis and stuff like that. And I moved up to Boston to do some, tech consulting. And I was in Boston for a bit. And then I always kind of felt this itch to kind of get back into more like the engineering side of things. So I started doing consulting for some big industrial manufacturers like Schneider Electric and ABB. And one of the big things they were trying to figure out is how can they digitize some of their factory operations that were specifically for DFMA, right? Designed for manufacturing and assembly. And these were pretty much large industrial products like electrical rooms, switchboards, switch gears. They were pretty much all pen and paper. And I essentially worked with them for probably about 5 or 6 years to essentially deploy certain technical solutions, mainly ERP systems that didn't really work in the way they wanted and the way I wanted. It was more around helping the financial side of things, kind of track things financially and not around operations. But, that was one of the big gaps I saw when I was doing it. And that also kind of gave me the seed idea to kind of start Offsite, to kind of build a more comprehensive project management solution for operations. So you can actually build better, higher quality products. You can learn project from project, right? You can have these systems in place where if you're doing prefab for year 1, by year 5, you're very good at prefab. And you can figure all the ins and outs and build things more efficiently, like estimate costing, scheduling more efficiently, and stuff like that. So that's kind of the background.
Love it. And I would love to address the elephant in the room, right? Like I feel there are so many people that are always comparing construction with a car manufacturer or something like that you can produce on a mass scale with the same quality, and it's kind of a dream, right? Like just produce houses and then be able to just put them and just build them real quick. But that's still not a reality. Why do you think that's happening?
Yeah, so I think the big difference is, like, for cars, they're mostly going to be the same car, right? Like, you can have different color, there's certain you get certain options, and that's pretty much it. For based on what type of things you're prefabbing, right? There's a lot of differences that can come up, especially on the design side. So based on, if you, let's say you're doing like a multifamily project, every multifamily building would more or less be unique, right? And I think that's, in terms of where the US is and kind of the West side, that's where the demand has been. Like, no one wants the same apartment complex to look exactly the same. Like, developers don't want it, people don't want it. But in Europe, in some cases, or in Japan, like, they don't really care that much. So I think there's that difference in, like, supply and demand, like, based on what people want. And that's also kind of driving it. But given that where we are today, like, design is becoming more like standardized, more interchangeable, interoperable. So I think over time we'll get to a point where we can kind of have our cake and eat it too, where you can design bespokely and also build in a certain way where that process is more standardized and repeatable.
No, absolutely agree. The complexities are much larger in our industry because everything is custom. And even if you want to build the same building on the same one building next to the other, things might change. Like even you use the same design, right? Like construction code or the views, or always there's always something that changes. No, absolutely. But eventually we should reach a point where, like you said, we have pieces that are like Legos, and we should be able to put together uh, buildings in a. I'm not saying 100%. I don't think that's ever gonna happen. Like putting together buildings 100%, but at least I don't know 70-80% prefab. Do you think that's gonna happen soon?
Yeah, I think that is the goal for a lot of these things, right? So you think about solely on the commercial side, right? Um, for a commercial project, which this could be like a hospital, this could be a multifamily building, it could be dorms, it could be a data center, right? So for these commercial buildings, what percentage of it is prefab today? I would guess 5 to 10%, right? Maybe on like the very high end data center construction side, because they value speed rather than cost at this point, that may jump to like 15 to 20. Do I see a world where that becomes like 20 to 50%? Absolutely. I think that is kind of where we're heading towards. And as you can modularize different components within a commercial building, like generators, switchboards, electrical rooms, exterior panels, interior panels, bathroom pods, like whatever ends up being, you can probably prefab a lot of it. He's like, get your supply chain built out, and then you can do it. So
Yeah, you mentioned something that I feel it's a key here, which is supply chain.
yeah,
Because even if you're prefabbing, like you still need to rely on vendors and a lot of times rely on materials that are not available, and there are so many different vendors out there. Um, do, are you? What do you think related to that? Like, are you helping with Offsite solve that part of the problem, or do you
yeah.
try to solve that in the future?
I think the big growth that I'm beginning to see, and then I think where the market is headed is, um, the supply chains for existing, like, specialty contractors, right, that build some of this stuff already, but they do it on site instead of off site. They're going to start migrating some of that business off site, right? So existing specialty contractors has been around for like 80 years. They do over $1 billion in revenue. doing on-site construction, building electrical products or whatever the build outs would be, or mechanical, plumbing, and stuff like that. More of that will be done off-site. And they already have the established supply chain already with their vendors for the last 50 years, more or less, right? So what they're kind of thinking is economically, where the world is at, do enough people to do these on-site work, do people want to go and do construction, right? That will drive up demand from a cost perspective, right? And then from that, like, how can it economically build efficiently in this new world where not a lot of people are in construction, costs are going up? Is there a way to build more efficiently? And that's kind of where factories pop up, right? Because you have the ability to build more efficiently, less material waste. You can do multiple shifts, essentially in a building. So like based on the weather, sometimes you can't really build outside, like 6 months of the year if you're in Boston, right? Stuff like that. That matters. So if you need to build and you want to build efficiently, then there's other routes to go. And maybe that wasn't true 20 years ago, right? There was enough labor available to kind of do this type of work, but will that be true the next 10 years, next 20 years, right? Are people get into this industry? So that's the uncertainty that people are trying to deal with now. And the flexibility is like, maybe prefab is the answer and we should do more prefab, which is what we're seeing. So
No, it makes sense. And I do agree that it's part of the future of the industry. We either do that or the industry, given the fact that there is lack of labor, like is gonna be less and less efficient every year when it should be more and more efficient every year. But I'm also curious on the fact that when you mentioned like subcontractors, that I don't know, any specialty subcontractor, right? And do you think that they will start doing prefab on their own, or they're just going to rely on other companies doing the prefab, and they just becoming an installer, not doing the prefab themselves? What do you think is going to happen there?
I think they're going to do their own prefab. I think they're going to open their own prefab because they can control it more. They'll more or less decide for each individual project whether or not how much prefab there should be, right? Maybe it'll be some prefab, maybe it'll be mostly prefab, right? And they'll probably also do the install as well. But yeah, that's where I see it going. And even in some cases, general contractors are moving towards prefab themselves. So they're creating their own self-perform factories that would do, in some ways, competing with like specialty contractors because there isn't enough that they have available, right? So the talent is very scarce. So there may be a talent war at some point where, in order to get this work done, they need their own factories.
True. That's true. Like general contractors used to, most of them they still don't do self perform, but I think 10 years ago most the ones that did self perform were just doing concrete, and nowadays you see more and more of them just doing the trades, like doing MEP or the work that other subcontractors are doing. Yeah, it's just interesting.
Yeah. A lot of the big ones are moving towards it. They're going to open their own factories. I think a lot of these specialty contractors will going to open their own factories because they're big enough and they're established enough where they have consistent demand, right, for projects. So they're like, I'm going to decide, is this a prefab project or is it going to be on site? Is there a mix that we can do that makes sense economically for it? And another big factor that someone mentioned to me is like by having a factory, you can actually retain talent better, right? Because from that perspective, if you have a project that ends and there's a gap in some aspect, they may go somewhere else. But if you just have them just work in a factory, it's more consistent business and they know where to go every day, and then they can also build more stuff in the factory so they can actually expand their product portfolio. Like, I do panels, I can do bath pods in here, I can do all these different things. It allows them to actually bid on more diverse projects, and they can retain their talents, and then they can actually become like a bigger company. So there's also some incentives there to kind of have a factory as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also the fact that I know a big GC that, for example, they have a factory for steel, right? They do the whole steel structures. And at the beginning, it was just for their own projects. And now when we don't have enough projects or they don't have enough demand for the factory, they just sell to other subcontractors or general contractors. So I just feel that it's really interesting that you can start selling the service, right, of being a
Yeah.
uh,
Oh yeah, I've heard because they already have all the machinery, so it's like another project. Hey, I need some of these like, you know, steel things like each steel cut in a certain way, and I have all my frame cam machines available. Like, all right, you just rent them out from me, and then I'll just do
yeah.
it for you, right? So,
No, absolutely. And what do you think about, because we all know the Cateras of the world, right? Like startups that these are now no general contractors or subcontractors. They're just doing a small piece or but these are startups that just from scratch they want to be subcontractors that are doing even sometimes the design, the whole thing, right? Like end to end, doing design, production, installing everything. Would you think? Do you think those companies are going to be successful, or it's too early, or what opinion do you have on those type of companies?
I think based on kind of how they're set up, they can be successful, right? I think this if you're doing construction and software, I think that's very difficult, I would say, right? Because like to complete different businesses, different business margins, different salaries for people and stuff like that. So making that meld together is very difficult. I think what's going to happen is, the ones that we've seen do work really well would be like if you're a developer and you also have a GC arm, right? Like a Greystar, for example, and then you also want to have maybe a factory on top of that. So you're also your specialty contractor. We've seen those kind of work out where you're kind of vertically integrated from that perspective. But the technology side, I haven't seen that work at all yet. Right? You've seen developer owner get into GC, get into specialty contractors, and they own a piece of everything in some aspects, and they work together and it works. And they may, if for an on-site deal, then all three of those teams may all buy Procore, right? For example, because there's especially for that. But I've never seen like, and Katera was the first one to try, but I'm sure others have tried it as well, right? Like the V's of the world and stuff like that try to add a technology element to it, and ultimately didn't work out.
No, absolutely, and even integrations between different stakeholders is typically downstream, like the owner having their own architectural team or their own engineering team or their own GC. But it's also hard. I've not seen that happening. Like subs becoming a GC. Sometimes they do, but it's not as common. Or GCs becoming an owner. It's typically downstream. Um, but also, yeah, technology companies, I think it's hard. The only ones that I've seen that succeed, I think in a way, or at least not failing completely like Katera or Beep did, was I think are companies who just have become an actual subcontractor or a GC. I've seen those type of startups that they want to be like a software company, and then they realize, like you said, we cannot do both. We cannot be a software company and also be a subcontractor. And they decide like, let's just be a fancy subcontractor, a fancy general contractor, and they're successful, but they're not disrupting or providing an end-to-end product. uh, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, it's a different type of business, different like scalability. Maybe things will change with like software development changes, costing goes down. Like with AI in the world, who knows? Anything can gotta happen. But yeah, I think historically, like builders want to build and they want to focus on building. And as a software company, we want to enable that, right? Like the goal for me is if I can enable my clients to have more prefab projects, that's my goal, right? I want them to be successful with the prefab project, be able to track production, quality, labor, materials, and then they make more money, better margins, and then like, okay, let's just do more of these prefab projects and let's use Offsite to manage that. And if I can kind of create that market flow, that would be, very successful on my end.
Yeah, no, I agree. You think that maybe the ones that are going to be successful in the future are the ones that are like really they're targeting a specific niche. Like, hey, I want to, I don't know, automate the design of, I don't know, small houses in the Middle East or Midwest or whatever. Sure, it's a really specific niche market where you just do design for a specific type of building, or hey, I want to do 3D printing for, I don't know, pipes, and I just do
Mhm.
specific weird shapes of pipes, and that's. But I don't foresee a startup in the short term trying to be, the 3D printer startups or the uh, prefab doing 1,000 different pieces, because that's already complex for a regular company. Even more if you're a company that's has never done that. And now that you mentioned offsite, when you said that, yeah, your idea is to push the industry to do more prefab, right? um how it happened to you that you approach a company that is not doing any prefab, and you implement offsite, and based on that they started doing it, or do you always end up working with companies that are already doing prefab?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both in some aspects, right? So, like an example would be, I think we're one client, a couple of years now, but they essentially got into prefab because they're on this big healthcare project, right? And I think they were doing bath pods for this like $1 billion healthcare project, and then they essentially didn't really do much prefab before, but they opened the facility to build these bath pods, and then afterwards they realized like let's just keep it, right? It did enough demand in this area to kind of do like bathroom pods, and then now they're doing more panels as well. So they kind of got into prefab from that perspective, right? And that's especially contractor. I think I spoke to one general contractor that he's been doing construction like 35 years. This is his first prefab project he's ever done, ever. And he's been doing prefab for 35 years. So is there a movement? Is there something going on in his market that makes prefab more attractive? Absolutely. How fast would that move? Right? Like how quickly can prefab kind of take up? I think there are, how I think about it is like layers of friction, right? A lot of unknown unknowns. So how do you remove that layer of friction? How do you make it easier for people to get into prefab and do it? Adding software is one element of that, right? So you can like, hey, get more transparency in your factory, make owners more comfortable, like pushing prefab, right? Because if you go to a job site, you can kind of know what the progress is, right, of any building. But if you're doing prefabs in a factory, is a little bit unclear, not used to it. So how do you provide a level of communication, coordination, and get owners very comfortable into the funding more prefab? And then the factories get better because they do more projects, they learn from it, and then they can invest in more in it, and then ultimately it'll be cheaper and more efficient over time, right? So the question would be, how do you remove those layers of friction? And I think software like Offsite is a big piece of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You make it more predictable, and I also do feel that a lot of companies, they don't have enough information about prefab. Like they're scared, right? Like we are all scared of what we don't know, right? Or and I do feel there is something that sometimes companies don't know, and they don't like to do it because just they're afraid of the stuff they don't know. But by any chance you have the metric of, and I know this is super broad, super broad, but if I'm a GC or or not, or a sub, right? And I don't do anything prefab, any prefab.
Mm-hmm.
If you come to me, it's like, hey, to do prefab, you need to have a factory and an investment, and it might be a little bit of risk in there. But do you know uh, the return of investment? Typically, the ROI. What's the ROI on a typical
It
company?
kind of depends on the project that they're on, right? So if it's a big enough project, they can just attribute that cost, the overhead cost, to like, let's say you have an owner that really believes in prefab, or wants to do it, or wants to do this specific project, right? It's like, hey, if we do a prefab and I essentially have like 5 years of work here, I can easily spread that cost out over those multiple projects, and it'll be very economical for me, and it'll also be better for you as an owner because you get the product faster, and then we can go prefab, and it'll be cheaper over time. That's typically what we see is like a kind of a coordination between all the stakeholders, where like it makes sense to do prefab here. The owner's on board, GC is on board, the contractors on board because they're doing more of heavy lifting from that perspective. Yeah, so that's typically how we see it more or less come together. There needs to be some sort of investment up front, and the stakeholders need to be okay with like the risk of doing that. And I don't think a specialty contractor, unless they're very, very large, will be willing to take it all on themselves without, some substantial ROI on it.
Are there any good practices that you recommend for somebody who's going to embark on that? Because, like you said,
Yeah.
there's a big risk. Like you're doing something that you have never done, and mistakes can happen. It's normal. But there are any like tips or tricks, let's call it like that, that you would give someone who is trying to do that from the first time?
I would say you want to invest in technology overall when you open a factory, because you want to be set up for success, right? So from that perspective, you want to know, like, okay, for this factory to be successful, I need this stakeholders involved. I know there's going to be some mistakes along the way because it's my first time. I need to be transparent about that. I need to communicate. And a lot of software, not only just Offsite, but other softwares out there today, even design software, engineering software, like the ability to communicate in real time and pretty seamlessly with like what my workflow is. This is how I plan to do it. That mitigates a lot of the issues that come up that I've seen in the past, right? Because it's no longer like the black box, and maybe in the past they were more or less okay with it, but given the amount of cost investment up front, there is a certain expectation that comes with it. And having technology to add the level of transparency, I see work out very well, even if there's mistakes. So just doing it on your own, hey, we'll figure it out, and we'll have like a monthly meeting, typically does not go well once things don't go the way they want to go, right? So that level of like having, and even for Offsite, we even offer a scenario where we give free access to GCs and owners on certain projects that are being worked on.
That's really interesting. I've been on projects like, I don't know, like Resorts World, for example. It's one of the big ones there in Vegas that I was involved on, and that one or many others. But I remember that that it was just weird for me, the miscommunication, disconnection there was between the owner, the GC, and mostly between the GC and the subs. Like they even had different schedules. Like, and it's like, hey, we're building the same thing. How you can have separate schedules, or like, so it's so great that you as an owner or as a GC can be connected to what subs are doing. Because in the end, if they don't do a good work, it's going to affect you anyway. It's not that they have a contract and that's it, and who cares? That's never the case. That's never the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And then having that level of visibility for delivery dates from the factory is pretty critical. Because seeing that, okay, is this going to be here on time by this day, or because they got to install it, right? You don't have that much storage on the job site. So they need to come fairly quickly. And when you do it, you got to rent out equipment, cranes, trucks, stuff like that. So it all needs to be coordinated well for you to get the full value for Offsite. Because people just think, oh, we're going Offsite, it'll be cheaper and faster. Like, no. You actually you got to make it happen. You can't just assume it's going to happen if we go prefab. Like, you got to make sure you can manage your materials well, you can manage your labor well, delivery is on time with no quality issues, production is going well. Like, all that needs to happen, or you don't actually realize the value, which is some of the problems that could arise.
No, absolutely. It's not magic. It's like implementing any other technology out there. Like nothing is going to be a click and then that's it. But I also hear complaints all the time on, I don't think there's even one construction project in the world that you define the schedule the first day, and you accomplish the schedule exactly as you planned. That never ever happens, and many of the times, I think it is to blame supply chain on the delivery to the job site. Have you seen improvements while working with subcontractors and communicating this efficiently, or subcontractors, I don't know, dealing with vendors, you oversee what they're doing with Offsite? Have you seen improvements when they implement technology?
Yeah, for sure. Especially if it's a scenario where you're getting a sub-assembly from another factory and you actually own that factory. and they're feeding the sub-assembly to you, and then you like finally assemble it. If you have visibility into both factories, that helps a lot, right? If you're both doing kind of prefab, and for Offset, we have like a feature where we can link accounts, so you actually can do a digital view of their factory as well and see where it is and see when it's coming to your factory. You can put it together, because supply chain, when people think about it, oh, it's just all like raw materials. Like, it's actually not, right? Because they also need to cut it, need to like assemble it in some aspects for you, right? And then they need to deliver it. So some will be raw materials, some will be pre-assembled, some will be more pre-assembled. How do you track all those at once from a schedule perspective? Fairly difficult. And I don't know how you would actually solve. I think a lot of like software companies now are doing AI to kind of solve it. I'm not sure if that will. Like that's what people are trying to say. Oh yeah, AI scheduling for project schedules, but it's complex, right? Because it's not just you're buying a bunch of wood and steel and bolts and that's it. It's like, all right, you're buying a self-assembly from another company. So how fast do they need to put it together? How unique is it? So what they're doing is they're like, okay, I could build 50 of these. 50 are all somewhat unique. I can approximate I can build these in these certain times, but I don't know, right? I've never really done it because it's not like building a car over and over again, necessarily different. And then you do like in times that by 50. So you're buying 50 from different like sub-assemblies from all these different subcontractors. So like, yeah, that's where the complexity comes in. And better visibility into that would definitely help.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I agree. And like, yeah, AI it's gonna help, but it's just another tool. It's not magic. And like you said, schedules. I don't buy it. Like there's
Right.
never gonna happen that AI is gonna
Yeah.
provide the ideal schedule because there are so many variables. It's so complex. I do think AI might be able to suggest or warn you about like, hey, something might happen here if you don't adjust, or something might like it's just that like just approximation and comments on stuff that might happen, might or might not happen. So only that, for now at least.
Yeah.
Maybe one day it will get like,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there's a lot of startups doing it, so maybe someone will figure it out. I don't know.
yeah, eventually. Oh, it will get. I feel it's gonna get gradually better. Like everything at the beginning, it's like image generation. At the beginning, it sucks. Now it's almost real. So it gets slowly better over time, and I think the same is gonna happen there. Even more if you're doing more prefab and using more robotics and using more reliable methods. I think it's gonna be much more easier also to estimate, I guess, in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think prefab would make things definitely more transparent and repeatable. So because instead of potentially having, say, 5 subcontractors delivering your products, it could be 2 because they can pre-assemble it for you, and then you can have more completed product when you go to the job site. So maybe that's part of the answer. You reduce
How
complexity.
you? Yeah, no, absolutely. And how you guys do to? So if one of your subs is using Offsite, right, and you said you can connect factories of other vendors or people who are doing the prefab, or
Mm-hmm.
have you come with the situation of a sub that they own Offsite, but the supplier or the vendors they don't have Offsite? How you deal in those situations? Like they can use it anyway, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it's kind of similar to other types of enterprise apps where like whoever's paying us, they kind of own the data, and we have an unlimited user model. So yes, you could give access to other people, right? But typically they'll give limited access. They don't want them messing around with their data. What ends up happening is like if you like the software, they're like, hey, I also want to own that data too. I want some because I have a factory as well, and I want to see how things work. So they'll buy offsite, right? So that's kind of where the differentiator is like, what's the data ownership going to look like? And then is enough value where I want to own the data after the project as well and from other projects.
All right, that makes sense. So given the fact that prefab is going to have a bright future, right? Like eventually we'll get to a place that
Yeah.
at least we're going to get to that 50%. What's next for Offsite? What you guys are planning for the next 2, 3, 4 years?
Yeah, I think, when we started out, we had like one core module, which is the project management module, right? And then we quickly added quality reporting. The quality reporting is pretty critical in beginning around housing, right? You need third party state inspections done. Even if you wanted to do some more complicated commercial buildings, you need like some UL like certifications. So that was really important to kind of build out that module for reporting. And we also added analytics recently, right? Over the last 2 years, we launched a materials management module, the labor tracking module. So materials essentially would track when you buy a material and comes to the factory where that material goes, like which project it goes into, right? Because then you can attribute the cost to that. And then if it doesn't go into that module or panel or product, it will either go into waste, which would mean you throw it out. And then you want to, for a productive factory, you want to track how much waste you have, you know, per year, per project, what ends up being, so you can optimize your material buying. And then for labor, and it's another kind of factor, right? In terms of when it's successful factory is within Offsite, we kind of track when the person comes in, what station or process they're working on, like what we call zones. And then once they kind of do that, then what project or product they're working on, right? Because the scenario would be if they come to the factory, they clock in, right? They're working on electrical and there's no product there, you're technically just losing money because you can't attribute that labor cost to a project. And therefore, you're just paying them to show up and do nothing. so, so you want to track what's the difference between logged hours on a project and then idle time, which means that you show up to the factory and then that's it. So how do you optimize your workforce and stuff? But sometimes that becomes the case, right? Maybe they're backed up in like the plumbing section and just no work to be done electrical. And you have 5 people show up, and then you should have told them last week to not show up because they're hourly employees and they should go to the job site instead and do something else there. So that coordination needs to get pretty well done in order for you to run a successful factory. So that's kind of what we're building. Is just like all the tools that you need to run a successful factory, all the main variables that could go wrong, which is, production being late, delivery, poor quality, mismanagement of labor and materials and stuff like that. So if you can get all those 4 right, your factory will be successful.
And it makes sense. And maybe in the future, there's not going to be even labor, and it's just going to be controlling if the machines are efficient enough or not.
Yeah, if you get those like Tesla, like humanoid like robots or something, or they start doing most of it, yeah, that'd be awesome.
That's the only thing with construction. Like, given the fact that everything is custom and you cannot have a production lane and produce everything in mass scale, you still to either rely on people or a robot. But I don't think there is a robot on Earth that can be as precise and as complex to do all the stuff that you need to put together an assembly. So,
yeah,
but it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen for sure.
eventually, at some point, we'll go get there.
And Offsite is gonna be there to manage it. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. I don't want to take a lot more of your time. I know you're a busy guy, Andrew, but before we wrap this up, can I ask you a couple of ping pong questions?
Sure.
Let's start with can you tell me a great AC software besides Offsite, right?
A great software for what project
for the AC? Yeah, well, in general, AC in general, any great one. So we don't have to just say Offsite or Prefab.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've seen Procore has been pretty well adopted and a lot of the good things. I think they've been around for a while, like 20 years or something like that. And I think they used that time wisely. They built out a lot of features that their clients needed. I think at that point, I'm not sure how many competitors there were, but probably not that many in construction, right, for a while. And they built out this entire suite of products that works really well for GCs. So I would say they're probably, from what I hear, very well adopted. And in even like Autodesk, they start off more on the design side, and I think they're slowly getting to the project management side because that's kind of like a natural movement upstream. So the design has been kind of like the standard, like Revit, right, has been the standard. I wish they would develop more cloud stuff for it, right? That's been behind for a while, but eventually it'll get there, hopefully. But
I
yeah,
guess develop more stuff, period, because they don't even develop. They just, most of it is just
yeah,
buy and
they have like a monopoly pretty much on it for now. Like we'll see. Yeah, I mean the previous, I think, chief product officer, co-CEO of Autodesk just launched his own company, Motif or something.
motif. Yeah, I saw it. Amara.
I have this feeling they're going after Revit. I have a feeling because I was hoping it makes a lot of sense.
More than a feeling, I think it's a reality. They're going after Revit, and they have a lot of talent and a lot of money, so they may be able to accomplish it actually, and a lot of experience. So
Yeah, I mean it's definitely gonna be cloud first with like open APIs and stuff like that. It'll be great. Yeah.
there is no other option. Like people nowadays, like you won't have something real time cloud. Like there are some things that are obvious nowadays, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, and the next question is, what do you think is going to be the next big trend in AC?
I think it's still gonna be prefab. I think it's still gonna be that. You know, when it started, with low like interest rates, there's a lot of startups pop up. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great. Interest rates went up. A lot of those startups are no longer here, right? And now like high interest rates are kind of going to be around for a little bit, so we'll see how it goes. But the established players, like the DPRs of the world, like all the big like especially contractors like PCI, they're actively investing in prefab, right? Because they have the pipeline, they have the clients. So it may be a slow and steady thing where if they give us 5 more years, it could be 25% prefab to like 50% prefab on projects, compared to like 5 to 10% where it is now.
Hopefully. Um, so if you could choose a person you could collaborate, it could be any person in history. Which person would you choose?
Probably like Isaac Newton. Yeah, probably like if you ever read about his life, it is crazy how fast he accomplished something. Like he did gravity and that, but he also like did calculus to prove he discovered it or invented it just to prove something else he's trying to do. Yeah, so I'm just like, oh, this guy's come slow, and he did it when he was like under 30, and he did it when he was like 27. So it was like he did all that. It was because the people didn't live that long back then, right? So he did all this stuff in like a very short time period, which is like, makes you wonder. But yeah,
and at that time, now if you think about it, it might sound easy, but like so many years ago, that was like so hard to discover those kind of things. So it's just insane. Absolutely. And then last but not least, what's your favorite building in the world, and have you ever visited?
My favorite building in the world. I have many kind of things. I'm from New York, right? So like I like the Empire State Building. I remember when I was a young kid, I went to the World Trade Center for the first time, and I was like, wow. I was like 5 years old. Right? So stuff like that, it makes you kind of just think about all the great architects and build difficult things that people are building in the world and see like, the risk people take to kind of make things happen. Always inspiring there. But I would say the tallest building now, where is that now? I think it's either Dubai or Singapore.
Dubai, the Burj Khalifa.
Yeah, so I think I'll probably want to visit that. That's probably on my bucket list.
That's cool. Actually, Saudi Arabia, it's planning. Burj Khalifa is almost one kilometer, and like Saudi Arabia is now building the one that is going to be the tallest with, I think, 50 meters more or something like that. But they're planning to do one that is 2 kilometers. So,
wow.
and they're just debating that it's even possible.
Yeah, it's probably a lot of factors that go into because at a certain point, there's probably some sort of limit that we hit, right? Where like if it's a certain size and width, like it can't go any
space, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's gonna be interesting. All right, thanks so much for your time, Andrew. This has been enlightening. But before we say goodbye to each other, can you tell everybody where they can know more about Offsite and where they can contact you?
Yeah, so you can go to a website, www.offsite.com. It's SIGHT, it's not SITE, so that's slight difference there. You can follow us on LinkedIn. We post a lot of content there. You can subscribe to a newsletter. We do a lot of like different thought leadership stuff. We do some client case studies to see how we deploy our software. So we put that on our website as well.
All right. Thanks so much for your time. It's been great talking to you, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon. All right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Thanks to our listeners. If you like this content, you can find past and upcoming episodes in ascworks.everse.com and at all of our Everse social media. We'd love to hear from you and recommendations for new content, so leave us a DM and we'll make sure to catch it.